In the grim darkness of the future, there is only war. You are one of the Emperor's elite, a space marine, tasked with defending the Imperium of Man from threats that lie both outside and within. The mutant, the heretic, the alien, all will fall to your wrath. I'm Darcblade, and welcome to this class guide to the Vanguard in Space Marine 2. In this video we will go over the basics of the class, weaponry at their disposal, the best builds, and a little bit of the lore behind the class. The Vanguard, in terms of lore, is actually known as a Reaver. These are Primaris Space Marines, so they're not firstborn Marines, that are designed for rapid infiltration and lightning assaults, specialising in terror tactics to flank foes and high priority targets, eliminating their foes with bolter fire, grenades, deadly melee capabilities, and Vox amplified roars. They also have unique tools at their disposal, such as grav shoots and grapple launchers, to which in terms of the game is their main ability. You can also tell a Reaver Marine thanks to them wearing Phobos armour and having skull themed helmets to add even more terror to their tactics. The Vanguard has access to a fairly large group of weapons at their disposal, 3 primary, 2 secondary and 2 melee. For their primary weapons they have access to the Instigator Bolt Carbine, which is a decent long-range burst rifle that can utilise a scope to enhance your accuracy even further. This is a good medium to long-range choice when using the Vanguard. You then have the Oculus Bolt Carbine, which is akin to a submachine gun that has an incredible rate of fire and can plow through enemies at close range quite quickly. It also has the ability to utilize the scope as well. And then you have the Melter Rifle, which in terms of lore and the tabletop is referred to as the Melter Gun. Imagine combining a flamethrower with a shotgun and you'll have some idea of what this gun is all about. Able to eliminate enemies at close range incredibly quickly, and on top of that it has the power to stagger most higher tier enemies as well, allowing you to chain fire into them, removing them from combat with ease. As for your secondary, you have the Bolt Pistol, which is the standard secondary sidearm for most Space Marines. It has no real upsides or downsides, and is a good all-round tool. But then the Vanguard also has access to the Neo Volkite Pistol that allows you to fire a beam of heated energy at opponents, to which this heat will build up upon them, and eventually they will explode, dealing thermal damage to them and any of their allies nearby. As for the melee weapons, the Vanguard has 2 of them. First of all is the Combat Knife, which is an incredibly fast melee weapon, great at taking down single targets, and you also have access to the Chainsword, which has a little bit more cleaving power than when it comes to the Combat Knife, but is still a wonderful tool for melee combat with few glaring downsides. As for the armour that the Vanguard wears, it's equipped with the Mark 10 Phobos power armour. These are more lightweight ceramited suits of power armour, and their streamlined design allows for greater mobility. In terms of gameplay, this translates to 2 pips of armour, which could be seen as a detriment when it comes to the Vanguard, but its perks counter the low armour rating, which we'll get into in a moment. But every Space Marine has access to a skill that is unique to their class. The Vanguard has access to the grapple launcher. When aiming at opponents, there will be a little display indicating that you can grapple to this opponent, to which, when using the ability, the launcher will propel the Vanguard towards the enemy, allowing you to perform a diving kick, in the process damaging them and knocking them back. This will interrupt opponents and is a great tool for you to be aggressive with. It also has 2 charges by default, so it can be used twice in quick succession if you so desire. You can also use the grapple launcher to grapple 2 opponents who are ready to be finished off with a finisher. This means when you zip over to them, you'll automatically go into the finisher animation as soon as you reach them. Now every Astartes also can augment their abilities via perks. This enables players to create builds for their Space Marines. The Vanguard's default perk, which can be found by mousing over their ability in the perk customization screen, allows the Vanguard to regenerate contested health 50% faster. So when you have white health on your health bar after taking damage, you're able to restore this through dealing damage more quickly than some other classes out there. But then you have access to the customizable perks. First are core perks, which are divided into 3 columns. For column 1, you can pick between moving targets, to which each melee attack you land on an opponent reduces range damage you take by 1% up to a maximum of 15%. The effect fades after not landing a melee attack for 3 seconds. You then have Melee Mastery, which melee damage is increased by 10% against Majora's level enemies or higher, so Tyranid Warriors, Rubric Marines or above. And then you have Upper Hand, to which after a perfectly timed parry, dodge or block, you do not lose control of your character upon taking heavy hits, and you cannot be knocked back for 5 seconds. Out of these, Moving Target and Melee Master, in my opinion, are the better options when it comes to the Vanguard, especially if you are specialising in melee combat. For column 2 you have Duelist, which the perfect parry and perfect dodge windows are increased by 50%. This is great for beginners who are learning the perfect parry and the perfect dodge timing, but can become a little bit of a crutch, especially when you switch over to other characters and classes. You then have Close Combat Focus, to which you take 20% less melee damage, but take 10% more ranged damage, so it's a risk-reward factor. It is good if you like to specialise in melee, but be warned, that won't stop ranged opponents from shooting at you. And to be honest, they can sometimes be the main source of damage you take. And then finally you have Conviction, which is a perk that the moment your armour is fully depleted, you take 15% less health damage for 10 seconds. A nice defensive perk. As for column 3 you have Retribution, to which after you are grabbed or knocked back, you deal 20% more melee damage for 10 seconds. An okay perk, but for the most part you don't really want to be getting hit or grabbed. You then have Consecutive Execution, a wonderful perk that is found on a few classes. This allows you to restore your grenades by 1 after killing 10 enemies in rapid succession. This has a 180-second cooldown, but nonetheless allows you to restore your grenades naturally. And then you have Honed Reaction, which is a perk that when your health is less than 50%, your perfect dodge window is doubled, allowing you to perform that said perfect dodge even more easily, especially when combined with the column 2 perk Duelist. You then have the team perks, which are perks that benefit not only yourself, but also your allies. First of all is Melee Champion, which all squad members' melee damage is increased by 15%. You then have Unmatched Zeal, to which melee finishers of extremist level enemies or higher restores a small amount of health for any squad member, so a nice little way to heal. And then you have Inner Fire, to which all squad members can restore ability charge by 15% when performing finishers. So a lot of the bonuses are tied to melee, either increasing their damage or their utility. I personally go with Inner Fire, as when playing the Vanguard I don't solely use melee. I still like to utilise my primary weapons. Next up though are the gear perks, which are perks that directly affect the grapple launcher. First of all, for column 1 is Restless Fortitude. After a diving kick, you take 50% less range damage for 10 seconds, a nice defensive perk. Next up is Shockwave, to which after a diving kick, you deal additional damage in a 5-meter radius around the impact site, allowing your grapple launcher to deal some AoE. And then you have Collateral Damage, to which the diving kick additionally deals a small amount of damage to enemies on the way to the grapple launcher's target. Personally, out of these I use Shockwave or Restless Fortitude, depending if you want to go offensive or defensive. Collateral Damage I don't recommend, because most of the time you end up accidentally grappling to the wrong target if there are enemies in front of the target you want to grapple to. Thus you don't end up hitting as many opponents on the trajectory path of the grapple launcher. Anyway, for column 2 you have Zone of Impact. Performing a finisher with the grapple launcher deals a small amount of damage to nearby opponents. So when you grapple into a finisher, it will allow for some AoE damage. You then have Tenacity, to which after killing 10 enemies in rapid succession, the diving kick's damage is increased by 25% for 10 seconds, but has a cooldown of 30 seconds. And then finally you have Tip of the Spear. Enemies hit by the diving kick take 50% more range damage for 10 seconds. This works really well in unison when you're using the Melter Rifle or the Oculus Bolt Carbine. And to be honest, it's the perk I go for out of these options. And then for column 3 you have Thrill of the Hunt. A perfectly timed parry, block or dodge will result in you taking 15% less health damage for 3 seconds. Again, another nice defensive perk. You then have Grim Determination. When a grapple launcher is on cooldown, your weapon damage is increased by 10%. Good for if you like to focus on dealing damage with your primary weapon. And then you have Combat Readiness. Your grapple launcher recharges 20% faster. And then finally you have Signature perks, which are perks that either enhance your gear or some other basic aspect of your marine. First of all is Tactical Prowess, to which performing a finisher with the grapple launcher restores its charge. So you can potentially chain grapple into multiple foes and not waste a grapple charge. You then have Emperor's Blessing, which upon taking lethal damage, you restore all of your armor instead of becoming incapacitated. But this has a 180-second cooldown, so this is a get out of jail free card and stops you from going down. And then finally you have Adrenaline Rush, to which after killing a Majora's level enemy or higher, you'll restore 10% of your health. This is a great survival tool and allows the Vanguard to self-heal, making it, in my opinion, one of the best perks available to this class. But when taking on the enemies of the Imperium, you can be more effective when you specialise in certain weapons and perks, thus creating builds. In this guide I will be showing off 2 builds that I use for the Vanguard, aimed at taking on the harder difficulties in the game. The first build I refer to as the Flaming Grappler, which specialises in using the Melter Rifle and close range combat. The second is the Versatile Grappler, which combines AoE grappling attacks, whilst also being effective at medium range combat. So first up, for the Fiery Grappler, you'll want to take as your primary weapon the Melter Rifle. I would also advise taking the Melter Rifle that has the highest ammo reserves on the harder difficulties, as we will burn through our ammunition quite quickly. As for the perks, they're kind of down to personal preference, but I've gone for Fast Reload to increase the reload speed of the weapon by 10%. I've then taken Adamant Reload, to which when your health is 30% or lower, the equipped weapon will instantly reload. I've then gone for Fast Regeneration, to which killing an enemy restores our armor 0.5 seconds quicker. I've then taken a second Fast Regeneration. I've then taken another Fast Reload for an even quicker reload speed. I've then taken Reload Immunity, to which, whilst we reload, we will not lose control of our character from heavy hits. We've then gone for Elusive Range, to which after performing a perfect dodge, the effective range of the weapon is increased by 3 meters for 5 seconds, countering one of the downsides of this weapon. And then I've gone for Perpetual Range, to again increase the effective range of the weapon by 1 meter. You can, if you want to, change some of these perks in favour of increasing the fire rate of the weapon, but you can stagger opponents quite easily with the Melter Rifle set up this way. As for the secondary weapon, it's down to personal choice. You can go with either the Bolt Pistol or the Neo Volt Kite Pistol. Again, I would recommend taking the weapons that have the higher ammo reserves, especially if you are going on the harder difficulties. For the Bolt Pistol, I'd then go into Great Might to increase the damage by 10% against Terminus level enemies, so boss level enemies. I've then gone for Retaliation, to which after a perfectly timed dodge, you'll deal 25% more damage for 5 seconds. I've then gone for Iron Grip. After a gun strike, recoil is reduced by 35% for 5 seconds. I've then gone for Divine Might to increase the damage of the weapon by 10%. I've then gone for Extended Magazine to increase the magazine size of the weapon by 15%. I've then gone up to Headhunter to increase the headshot damage by 10%. I've then gone for Elite Hunter, to which after killing a Majora's level enemy or higher with a melee weapon, the headshot damage we deal afterwards will be increased by 50% for 5 seconds. And then I've gone for a final Headhunter to again increase the damage of headshots. If you were going for the Neo Volt Kite Pistol though, I'd take Extended Magazines to increase the magazine size. I'd then take Combustive Momentum, to which after a gun strike, the heating speed is increased by 30% for 2 seconds. I've then gone for Increased Capacity. The maximum ammo reserve for this weapon is increased by 20%. I've then gone for Volkite Discharge Area, to which the discharge area expands by 20%, so the explosion radius is increased. I've then gone for Accelerated Combustion, which allows us to heat up opponents 20% more quickly. I've then gone for Violent Deflagration. After killing a Majora's level enemy or higher with a melee weapon, the heating speed is increased by 30% for 2 seconds. And then finally I've gone for Distributed Deflagration. So along with the Volkite's explosion, 25% of the heat is also transferred to surrounded enemies, allowing you to heat up multiple opponents quite quickly. Now as for your melee weapon, in all honesty, again I feel this is down to personal preference. You can take the combat knife or the chainsword, but regardless of which one you take, you'll probably want to go for the fencing weapon to allow you to parry attacks much more easily. As for the perks, if you're going for the combat knife, I'd first recommend taking Perpetual Strength to increase the melee damage. I'll then go for Kinetic Energy, to which after each consecutive heavy attack, it increases the heavy attack melee damage by 3% up to a maximum of 30%. I've then gone for 2 more Perpetual Strengths to increase the melee damage. I've then taken Shoulder Bash, which replaces the distance stab move. Whilst evading or sprinting, when pressing the attack button, you will quickly perform an area effect Shoulder Bash attack at opponents. This can interrupt them and allows for some nice AoE. I've then gone for Tyrannid Slayer to increase the damage against Tyrannids by 10%. I've then gone for Reeling Blow. Enemies hit by the Whirlwind Slash deal 30% less damage for 4 seconds, but has a 10-second cooldown. This is a nice debuff. And then finally I've gone for Extremist Slayer to increase the melee damage against Extremist level enemies by 15%. If you wanted to, you could consider moving one of the points up until Terminus Slayer, to increase the damage against Terminus level enemies by 20%, but in all honesty against Terminus level enemies, so Neurophropes, Carnifexes, Hellbrutes, I don't tend to fight them in melee that often. But whilst the combat knife is great for taking on individuals, if you want something with a little bit more power to it, that is just as good as dueling but also offers a little bit more cleaving potential, I'd recommend the Chainsword. So for its perks, I'll take Perpetual Strength to increase its damage, Swift Recovery, which allows heavy attacks to restore 100% more contested health, another Perpetual Strength. I'll then take Swordblade to increase the amount of light attacks we can perform in a row from 4 to 5. I've then gone for Tyrannid Slayer to increase damage against Tyrannids. I've then gone for Minoris Slayer to increase the damage against Minoris level enemies by 20%. I've then gone for Full Throttle, which replaces the punch move. This allows you to rev up and hold the chainsword to perform powerful attacks, increasing the damage by 100% for each second held. I've then gone for Extremist Slayer to increase the damage against Extremist level enemies by 15%. And then I've gone up to Majoris level Slayer to increase the damage against Majoris level enemies by 10%. So when it comes to the perks for the Flaming Grappler build, I'd recommend for your core perks in column 1 taking Melee Mastery to increase the melee damage against Majoris level enemies or higher. I'd then recommend taking Conviction, to which after our armor is fully depleted will take 15% less health damage for 10 seconds. You can replace this with Duelist if you want to, especially if you aren't confident in your abilities to perfect parry enemies or to perform perfect blocks and dodges. And then finally for the third column, I recommend Consecutive Execution, to which killing 10 enemies in a row will restore 1 grenade for our Vanguard. As for your team perks, I'd recommend taking Inner Fire, which allows all squad members to restore ability charges by 15% after they perform finishers. If you were playing with an Assault and a Bulwark, you may want to take Melee Champion to increase everyone's melee damage by 15% though. As for your gear perks for column 1, I'd recommend taking Restless Fortitude, which after performing a diving kick with our grapple launcher, will take 10% less range damage for 10 seconds. For column 2, I'd recommend taking Tip of the Spear, to which enemies hit by the diving kick take 15% more range damage for 10 seconds. This is going to be used in unison with our Melter Rifle, so we grapple to them, perform the diving kick, debuff them, and then melt them with that said Melter Gun. And then finally for column 3, I'd recommend taking Grim Determination, to which when our grapple launcher is on cooldown, our weapon's damage is increased by 10%, again increasing the damage of the Melter Rifle even further. As for the signature perk, I'd recommend Adrenaline Rush, which allows us to restore our health by 10% when we perform melee kills, which do include finishers on Majoris level enemies or higher. This will give you a build that is able to utilize the Melter Rifle incredibly effectively. Just remember to grapple to opponents that you want to take down quickly, not only to debuff them so they do take more damage, but also to buff yourself through perks like Grim Determination to increase your damage and give yourself defensive buffs such as Relentless Fortitude. But what if you want to play something else? What if you wanted to play a little bit more of a cautious build? Well, cautious and the Vanguard don't always go hand in hand. But you can play builds that are suited to more medium range combat, utilizing the Instigator Bolt Carbine and the Oculus Bolt Carbine. So the second build, I like to refer to it as the Versatile Grappler build. Perform quick AoE attacks in melee range, utilizing a certain combination of perks, but you're also able to perform at medium ranges thanks to the weapons we use. So first of all, I'd recommend taking the Instigator Bolt Carbine, taking again the weapon that gives you the most ammunition. As for the perks, I'd first take Headhunter to increase the headshot damage. I'll then take Efficient Hunter, to which after reloading whilst having low ammo, our headshots will now deal 35% more damage. I'll then take Fast Reload to increase the reload speed. I'll then go down to Adamant Grip to reduce the recoil by 25%. I've then gone over to Finisher Reload, to which after a finisher, the equipped weapon instantly reloads. I've then gone over to Fast Regeneration, to which killing an enemy restores our armor 0.5 seconds more quickly. I've then taken another Headhunter for more headshot damage. I've then gone down to Great Might to increase the damage against Terminus level enemies, and then finally I've gone for Increased Capacity to increase the maximum ammo reserve of this weapon by 20%. You could also take the Oculus Bolt Carbine if you wanted to, and the perks I would use include Great Might to increase the damage against Terminus level enemies, Retaliation, to which after a perfectly timed dodge will deal 25% more damage. I'll then take Perpetual Penetration to allow our shots to penetrate one additional target. I've then gone up to Fast Reload to increase the reload speed of the weapon. I've then gone over to Reloading Immunity, which prevents knockback to the Vanguard when performing a reload. I've then taken Extended Magazine to increase the magazine size of the weapon. I've then gone down to Divine Might to increase the overall damage of the weapon by 10%. I've then moved over to Magazine Restoration, to which when our health drops below 30%, your ammo reserves are restored by a full magazine. I've then gone over to Increase Capacity to increase the maximum ammo reserves of the weapon by 20%. And then finally I've gone for Great Might again to increase the damage against Terminus level enemies again by 10%. Now as for the perks for this build, first of all with the core perks, I've gone for Column 1 Melee Mastery to increase our melee damage against Majora's level enemies. For Column 2 I've gone for Conviction again, to which when we lose our armor we'll take 15% less health damage for 10 seconds. And then for Column 3 I've taken Consecutive Execution, to which when we kill 10 enemies very quickly we'll restore one of our grenades. This is very similar to the first build, there isn't much variety here. As for your team perk, I've gone for Inner Fire again to allow all our squad mates to recharge their abilities 15% faster when performing finishes. But as for the gear perks, this is where the main differences come into play. For Column 1, I've gone for Shockwave, to which our Diving Kick additionally deals damage in a 5-meter radius, allowing us to not only deal AoE but stagger multiple opponents. For Column 2, I've gone for Zone of Impact. After performing a finisher with that said grapple launcher, it will again deal another small amount of damage to nearby opponents. So combining them together allows you to do a decent amount of AoE damage with your ability. And then finally for Column 3 I've gone for Combat Readiness to allow us to recharge the grapple launcher 20% faster. You could potentially take Thrill of the Hunt, allowing us to take reduced health damage after perfectly timed parries, blocks and dodges, especially if you consider what we're going to cover next, which is the signature perk. Now normally I would take Adrenaline Rush to allow us to restore our health by 10% when we finish off Majora's level enemies in melee, but if you're more confident with your abilities to stay alive, you can take Tactical Prowess, to which performing finishes with the grapple launcher, it will restore its charge. So this combined with the gear perks Shockwave and Zone of Impact allows you to potentially chain grapples into one another over and over again. But every Space Marine out there comes with pros and cons. No Marine is perfect, despite what the Imperium will tell you. When it comes to the Vanguard, its biggest pro, surprisingly, is its survivability. Thanks to having a few key perks that increase your defenses, combined with perks that allow you to restore your health, you're able to survive quite effectively, regardless of the difficulty you're on. On top of that, the next perk is that this is a fast class. This is thanks to the ability, the grapple launcher, allowing you to whip around the battlefield, interrupting enemies calling for allies, or taking out key priority targets. And then finally for the pros is that this class is really aggressive when it comes to melee. If you're a player who enjoys that melee combat and being aggressive, this is going to be a class that you're going to get along with quite well. But there are cons. The two biggest cons for this class include the fact that we only have 2 armor pips. This is thanks to the Phobos armor, but it is slightly countered by the fact that we can regenerate our health and we have a lot of defensive buffing perks. And the other con is, unless you specifically counter it by taking the Instigator Bolt Carbine, this class can suffer a little bit when attacking opponents at range. But regardless of its cons, this is still a very effective class if you enjoy close quarters combat, whether it be via melee or via the Melter Rifle or Bolt Carbines. Able to bring down opponents quickly with the aggression that the Reavers are known for. But what are your thoughts? Please leave a comment down below, and until next time, I've been Darcblade, bringing you my guide to the Vanguard in Space Marine 2. Hope you enjoyed the video, thanks for watching, subscribe and like for more.